Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Laura Kovacs, and I'm honored to introduce Alexandra Horowitz. In her #1 New York Times bestselling book, Inside of a Dog, Alexandra Horowitz offered insight into the unique worldview of man and woman's best friend by considering the world from a dog's eye view. A reviewer for the Times said the book causes one's dog-loving heart to flutter with astonishment and gratitude. Horowitz is a professor of cognitive science and creative writing and runs the Dog Cognition Lab at Barnard College. In her new book, she explains the elegant engineering of the dog's olfactory system and the ways dogs comprehend the world through their most acute and profound sense. This evening, she'll be joined in conversation by my colleague in the Author Events Office, Jason Freeman. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
As evidenced by being a dog following the dog into a world of smell. You've used your experience in dog cognition to lead us down this rabbit hole as I've found it, and I kept having these look up in the air introspective moments reading it. Our most underused, undervalued sense, though a sense you tell us we use 1% of our lives using, which that seems like a significant amount in terms of our whole lives. So I guess really my first question is, how do dogs lead us into the world of smell? How are their experiences and perspectives so different than ours?
Well, profoundly different, I think. I got very interested in what it might be like to be a dog when I started studying the cognition and behavior of dogs. And apparently, what it is like is olfactory. It's really smelly. Olfaction is their primary sense. So if we see the world, and we imagine that the world in front of us is to be seen, they smell a parallel universe. And this room would be smelled before it is seen. And so it's a reversal of the sensory priority, I think, that we have. And I figured if I wanted to understand that at some point, I was going to have to use them as informants to me, to sort of show me what they're smelling.
I guess that leads to how that experience is so different. And part of the real fun early in the book is just reading about a dog's nose. Like how different, I know it sounds silly, but it's very true. Can you describe just this amazing mechanism and,
Sure.
and how it's so, I know one thing you say you hate in the book is when things are compared to human terms, the way dogs, can you do it as well as a human? So on its own terms, not even compared to
Sure,
ours.
right. Well, it's great to hear you say, like, one of the great fun things is, like, the part about the dog nose. That's really wonderful, because I do want to focus on just the anatomy, what the structure is that enables this behavior. And there are all these parts of it, they have this really long snout, which is the very complicated, what are called turbinate bones in it that allow air to be filtered and warmed as it's raced up to the olfactory receptor cells. They have, the part of the nose that actually does the sniffing is right back here in our noses, and also in there is between the eyes. It's a little patch of tissue. All this part is just filter. It's a beautiful filter, right? But it's just filter, and same with dogs. And they have hundreds of millions more cells that pick up smells back here than we do. So just quantitatively, immensely bigger nose potential. But they have a much better sniff than we do, which I think is kind of amazing, because I hadn't thought that one could have a better or worse sniff. Thank God I hadn't thought that, because I probably don't have a very good one. We sniff about once every 1.5 seconds. So if you just sniff, if everyone else just listen, do a sniff, you can do it to yourself if you want. And they do about 5 to 10 sniffs a second. So they're getting that many more olfactory pictures of the world every second. And then they even exhale better than we do. If you want to get rid of a scent in your nose, you exhale it out. But dogs don't want to get rid of a scent in their nose. They're still looking at it. And so they have the side slits of their nose, which allows exhaled air to go out the side instead of rushing out the indoor, as it were, pushing out smell. So the whole thing, the snout, the cells that pick up the smells, and the way of getting smells in and out are vastly superior. They're a design that hasn't been replicated, basically, by us.
Yeah, I was walking down the street, there was this dog at a tree, and the guy was trying to, I was like, no, give him a second. It's so rich for him. I'm telling you, you were really going to rethink things when you read this. And this sounds like a flip kind of question, and I said it to my colleagues, and kind of jokingly, but I was like, no, this is, if dogs can smell so well, why do they smell so bad? Because, and that gets to a fundamental question. We kind of talked about the mechanics, and now why is their perspective so different? Why, in an evolutionary sense, do they like that which we can find weird,
Foul.
repellent? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's true. People say to me too, if they can smell so well, why do they have to get right up in that other dog's butt, right? Like, as opposed to just smelling it at like a polite distance. And to me, that's like, if you rethink smells as just being information about the world. So every object has a smell. All objects you can see now have smells, right? And all of us have smells, and many smells. Then getting that smell, all that information is more varied and more interesting as you get up close, and not just good or bad. We don't open our eyes and say, of all the things we see, like bad, bad, good, 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 but that's sort of what we do with smells. We think like, oh, I love, toast. I love the smell of toast, but garbage on the street on a hot summer day in New York, I hate. But we don't think about the middle sets of smells that much, which are just like, this is the smell of me in the morning, and that's the smell of the bed, and that's the smell of the bathroom door when I open it as the bathroom's just been cleaned. We don't think of informational smells like that. So I don't think the dog is making a evaluative judgment about the smell which we find foul. They're looking at it as just a source of a lot of information. And even by getting closer, you get more information about the measure of the smell, the way, you go to see a piece of art in the museum and you don't like stand in the corner of the doorway just peeking in at the art. You get right up to it. You see something different when you're really close. And you maybe even hate that art, but you see it differently when you're near it. So I feel like that must be an analog to their approach.
And briefly, too, you use this phrase in there that they smell time, which I love. And so it's not even necessarily really even a linear sense. Can you talk about that briefly, too?
Yeah, well, I got this idea, which is a little bit of an imaginative extrapolation, that they're smelling time through just looking at behavior. I mean, if you look at what tracking dogs are doing, essentially, there's been nice research showing that tracking dogs can tell which direction somebody who they're pursuing has gone from the first, using 5 footsteps. In other words, they need 5 footsteps. That's not showing which direction the toe or the shoe is going. That's noticing that there's a concentration difference in the odor that's left behind on the bottom of the shoe between the first and the 5th footstep, about 2 seconds. So they're noticing really minute concentration differences. But what that also is something about time, because the stronger scent is the one that's newer. And that's always the case. If your dog walks out of your house onto the street or in your community, they're smelling who has been by, right? The smells are still in that area. And even if the person is gone, they can smell the presence of someone who's been by in the air, if recently, or on the ground, if later. So at some level, the smell information is giving them a sense of how long ago something has happened. And even smells, smells need air to move on. And so a room which has air currents through the day will in some way tell the time of day through its smell, because air moves predictably in a room. So air currents move up the walls as the day proceeds. In the mid-afternoon, they're in the middle of the ceiling, and then they kind of funnel down. So do smells. So a dog sitting at home all day will start to notice that. I'm not saying they're thinking, oh, it's afternoon, like the smells are coming right down. But they learn a lot of behaviors about what to do when based on what they sense. And this is one of the things they can sense.
It's so fascinating. You're going to get home and look at your dog.
Absolutely.
And bringing it to us, really, I see it's about leading us into a world of smell. And I see kind of 2 books layered upon each other.
Yeah.
And bringing it to us, it gets you thinking, gets me thinking at least, about why smell is so overlooked, by us as something that's important. Outside of simply the science, do you think there's a cultural reason that we kind of disregard this really important sense that we have?
Well, Freud thought that when we started standing upright in our evolutionary history and got our noses off the ground where they were before, that's when civilization really began. And there is a kind of theory that there is a correlation between stopping being this animalistic smelling animal and being visual animals. It allowed for the development of the frontal cortex, which is important for all sorts of higher cognition. And so there's this sort of tension between the smelling world on the one hand and the kind of visual cognitive world on the other hand. And I think we still a little bit live in the shadow of that idea, that to smell things is somehow cruder than to see things. And so there are some olfactory arts, but really very few. And culturally, at least right now, we're in this moment where smells are not mostly celebrated. We mostly spend our time trying to avoid smells, and certainly don't go out seeking smells, right? So it's surprising to me because it's like learning that we have this amazing, it's like having a sixth sense suddenly that we aren't using most of the time, but that we can use, and that's a little bit what the dog showed me.
You're giving me a great segue here. Okay, can you talk about, because you say it's not that we can't smell, it's that we largely don't. That's a quote from the book. And your intellectual curiosity, I'm presuming the dogs kind of open that door and you go through it and, mixing metaphors again down the rabbit hole. Can you talk about how you trained yourself, specifically how you did seek out smells and you took a smelling tour of Brooklyn?
Right, I did. Well, I'll tell you first, the first thing that happened briefly was I thought, well, my dog, I'm with my dogs all the time. They can show me what the smells are on the block. 'Cause you start noticing, if you live with a dog, where they're smelling. And so I thought, well, I'll just smell that myself. If a person is walking, if they go headlong for that tree stump, I'll go for this tree stump. If they sniff a person passing by, I'll sniff the air, And so I tried doing that. That was really awkward, really. So I thought, I am not up for this. I need more ammunition. And I found a woman named Kate McLean who is an artist and kind of does a smell geography, basically. Her work is to map urban smells. And she takes smell walks with groups in different cities where a group of people get together and she says, all right, we're going to go around these blocks and we're just going to collect smells. And so your duty basically is to go out and smell things. And that means smelling the air, going up to surfaces and giving them good smells, trying to name the smells or give them a color or describe them in some way. And so we started out all feeling a little funny about it. And within about a half a block, we're nosing garbage cans and ooh, mint. It was really weird, and every time you saw something new, a new scaffold or new posters put up or an air conditioner or a vent, we would beeline for it. And sure enough, all these things have smell information. And suddenly you realize this very ordinary block, which didn't look like much, has all this rich information in it. And it's really fun when you intentionally go to collect those smells, when they're not just happening to you, they're not just hitting you, but you're going to collect them. Then you can just discover them and gather them as opposed to feel attacked by them. So that was my first venture into smelling like a dog.
Can you talk about the smelly box too?
The smelly box?
Yeah,
the box that my husband got me. Oh, yeah. So he trying to maybe temper my smell experiments. My husband got me this box called Le Nez de Vin, and it is the nose of wine. So it's something that's very similar to what sommeliers use to train themselves, and perfumers too, to train themselves on the odor notes in wines. And of course, these are not odors added to wines, right? These are just extrapolated from the odors that are discovered in wines. And so there are dozens of little tiny bottles, little tinctures with little tiny bits of liquid, and you and you hold them up to your nose and you try to identify what they are. And some of them seem, resoundingly obvious, and then others you just, your mind boggles as you try to figure out what it is. And I had, some early amazing success, and also real problems differentiating things like orange and grapefruit. These are two objects that have been in my mouth for my entire life. I love them both. I pursue them both. But I had never really noticed that there's a really important smell difference between them. And I had to, keep training, blindly checking which one was which, for a week until I got it straight. And I could pull it out like a trick, which, impressed nobody, basically. But, and that's what I did. I went through until I could, recognize every one of those scents. And when you can do that, then you suddenly have in your mind some memory, some pictures, even potentially some language with which you could bring to your next smell experience, whether it's wine or anything. And notice, oh, that is kind of like the lindenberry, that I smelled before. And suddenly, that's when the smell world gets richer.
Yeah, you go out and have all of these other great smell adventures, which I should be a phrase for us all, I think.
I think so.
And thinking about it, is there any sort of quick, I read a few other interviews that you've done, hadn't seen anything like this, a quick crash course you can give us into how to be more mindful of this, something we can do maybe right here, right now, like something?
Well, okay, so I could have you sniff each other, I suppose, but I don't know how well you know each other, so I'm not going to do that. But like, for instance, I think part of what it is thinking about how we simply don't bother to stick our noses in things. But if we did, we would get some information from it. So I'll suggest this. How about, for those of you who are interested, how about you close your eyes and stick your hand in your pocket and pull out whatever's there and hand it to the person next to you to sniff. I don't know what you have in your pocket, but I'm making a little bit of a judgment that it's going to be something that somebody wouldn't mind. And then the other person, try to name what it is. Take a big sniff. You have to stick it close to your nose, or even if there's no one next to you, the people have no one next to you, stick your hand in your own pocket. See what you pull out and see if it has a smell, because I guarantee you haven't smelled that thing recently.
That's a great tip while you're doing that I read in the book, reiterated more than once. We always smell from afar, but like in the book, you reiterate, you gotta get up right on something.
Yeah, you have to get right. If you notice, the main thing that dogs do, besides all that great apparatus that they have, is they stick their noses close to things. And our nose is up here. And this is, unless an odor happens to be wafting by, we're not gonna get it. So you experience something there, whatever. I hope it was somewhat positive. But the point is that our world is filled with smells like this. And my world, now when I walk down the street, I grab a leaf and I crumble it between my fingers and I smell it. And I'm sitting somewhere and waiting and I smell my pen, or I smell the wall, the brick wall. You put your nose near things, and you notice that there's this dimension that you've been missing. And so, start inconspicuously with things in your hands. But I really encourage it.
One thing, there's several things that I read here that, intellectually I'm like, okay, yeah, I kind of knew that. But I'm like, wow, I really never thought about that. That smell is inherently tied to emotional experiences that we have. And that you smell that, and something was evocative there, I'm sure. But what is really striking for me is the other side of that, and we were talking about this a few minutes ago backstage, that we really don't have a vocabulary to talk about it. I don't know if when you guys were trying to describe what those things were, you were having difficulty. But in a culture that over-describes everything, why do you think we have so much trouble describing smells, to name them?
My first experiences with those little bottles were all like, oh, that's familiar. Like I've smelled that before, but not being able to put my finger on it. So we are not used to talking about what smells are, but also we always use the source as the name of the smell. So that's like an orange, that's like a boysenberry, that's like smoke, but not words, not blue, not a blue or a gray or musty. That's potentially, there are some potentially just smell like words, but they also have other sensory features. And I think it's because we've just downplayed it. We haven't bothered to fill out it's not necessary for us. There are cultures that use smell in their daily life, and they have really rich smell words, smell vocabulary. And you mentioned this being tied to emotion and memory. That's why I think it's really surprising that we don't value smells, because if I ask you I go around and ask people for their earliest smell memory, and you have one, and it's probably delightful, or it's nostalgic. It's your grandmother's attic, or your father's pipe. Then it's not just the pipe, but it's the whole scene where your father was sitting and the thing he used to do on Sunday afternoons. And suddenly this childhood evocation that just like appears. And it's a concoction, it's not a veridical memory, but it's full with this positive emotion. We usually don't have really negative early smell memories. They're usually pretty positive. So I'm surprised we don't intentionally do this. I did a reading at a bookstore in New York last month with Myra Coleman, and we tried to create a smell memory for everybody. So during the whole reading, we just made toast. So the whole place just smelled like toast. We thought, like, next time somebody's gonna have toast, they're gonna smell, they're gonna be like, "Where's that dog book? Where's that?" But we could do that, You could plant smells with an event that you want to remember, and then use that smell to re-evoke the event. And that emotional component, since smell is so tied to emotion, it would be great if we did.
Yeah. Switching gears slightly, I want to get to this because of our obvious hometown bias here. But you go to a place in Philadelphia that I find fascinating, and I'm going to weasel my way in there somehow. The Penn Working Dog Center.
Yes.
Can you describe that to us?
Yeah, well, Cindy Otto, who runs the Penn Working Dog Center, is here tonight. I will just say that. That's wonderful. Yeah, she and it are wonderful. Now basically establishment at Penn. This is part of Penn Vets. The Working Dog Center was formed to create a place to do a couple of things: to treat dogs who are detection dogs, search and rescue dogs who are sick or who need training with fitness, and then also they are doing basic research about detection dogs. I spent a little while there. I've visited a number of times. I've met the dogs and the people handling the dogs. And what's amazing is that they're now breeding dogs to become detection dogs, and they have them in this first early part of their life, and they're just exposing them to lots of different situations so their general purpose, search smelling dogs. What they're doing at the Working Dog Center is not doing any training of them how to smell. They never are like, here, smell this, the way we have to do. There are no series of bottles to train the dogs. The dogs can smell it. What they're training them to do is to just kind of care enough to tell us when they've smelled the thing that we care about. Oh, is it the illegal drugs? Is it a missing person? Is it contraband? Is it the dropping blood sugar of someone with diabetes? Is it a cancerous cell? In the breath, in the urine, on the blood. That's what the dog is being trained to care to tell us. And they do this because they have this great drive to play, basically, because that's their reward for finding what they find is like a tug toy. That's it. That's what they're doing. They're like finding the thing that gets them the game of tug or game of fetch. And so this is they're really the only place I know of that's doing the foundational research, also working with dogs who are active and need rehabilitation or need to work on their agility. And it's a kind of amazing place that is really evolving a lot. And many of you probably know about it, but it's right across the river.
I love, too, that there isn't a standard methodology for training dogs. And you mentioned you don't teach a dog how to smell anything. You just teach them, you encourage their drive and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're trying to
create a
mix the
standard.
art and the science, and then one day it'll be all science, which is pretty
Yeah,
fascinating.
surprising that, given there are all these dogs who work in different detection settings, you know, there's search and rescue, there are the police dogs, there are dogs at the airport, explosive detection dogs, that there's not just a method to teach them how to do that. You know, different institutions use different methods, and there's certifications, certainly, that you have to pass to be a handler, be a team working in one of those settings. But there's not, like, the verified method that works the best. And they want to try to help create and spread that. I mean, it's a positive, it's a reinforcement method, right? That encourages the dog and gives them a reward. It's also training the handler. Handler is a big part of that team. The dog's not doing it just by themselves. They work with a person, so that's the team.
You mentioned that they're trying to create, and it sounds something I think a lot of people in this room would be like, no, God, but an anti-pet. Like,
Well, that's my way of thinking about it, because, you know, when I would visit, you know, one of the things that the dogs have to do is alert at the site of the discovery of a missing person, or person that's alive or dead, who they're searching for. These are, by the way, they're not like they're trained on a smell and go find it. Often it's just, where's the person in this scene? A downed building or something. And that one alert often is a bark, because if they just sit nicely, the handler might not have caught up to them yet. So the bark helps the handler get up to them. And so, you know, you have a dog who will find somebody and then just sit agreeably and look like nice pet dogs do back at their person. It's like, look, I found. And that's not what they want. They want a bark, and then another bark, and then another bark, and then another bark. And these are dogs also who have a huge drive. You know, will want to keep working, keep working, keep working. And that's not the dog you seem to want at home. The one who's barking, barking, barking when they found the thing that's missing, or whatever it is, like the little treat under the sofa that's been there for 3 months, and also cuts to keep doing it. We want the dog who's sort of just chills out for most of the day, right? And then kind of will play with us and has their energetic moments, but also has their resting moments. And the detection dogs are not those dogs.
Interesting. There was so much to discover about different types of detection dogs while we're on that subject. And I think most of us, you know, have seen the beagles in the Jersey in the airport searching drugs, that kind of thing. One thing I'd never heard of that was so fascinating were conservation dogs, basically.
Yeah.
Can you talk specifically about whale poop?
Sure.
in Puget
I'd be
Sound?
happy to
Okay.
talk about whale poop,
Okay.
and there's so many contexts in which that would not
Right.
be an okay sentence to say.
Tonight it is.
The conservation canines is a group, and there are other wildlife dogs working with wildlife researchers who are basically interested in mapping populations of wild animals. But you don't always see these wild animals, and mostly what they do is collect information through their scat, their poop. And at one point, this researcher, Sam Wasser, who I talked to, who's at Washington, realized, like, oh man, you know, if I can get dogs doing this, that would be great. And in fact, you know, if there's anything dogs really want to find naturally, is like the poop that is out there somewhere. And so that's what they have their dogs doing, finding populations of wild animals. And he has one amazing dog named Tucker, who's a black lab, who he's using to map the resident population of orcas in Puget Sound. And it's really hard to see where they are. As it happens, though, when they poop, it floats to the surface and it hangs out there for a short amount of time, maybe 30 minutes, and then it sinks. Well, if they can get to it, they can get information about who the individual was that left this. So they need Tucker for that. They take Tucker out on the boat with them, and Tucker up to a nautical mile away. This is in the sea, basically, you know, with the waves, and there's a current, and there's wind, and it's also just poop floating on the surface. The dog can lead the boat to the site within half an hour. Initially, they couldn't even believe that Tucker was doing this, and he was alerting in a direction, and they would say, like, you know, don't go that direction. There's I don't see anything out there. But then they put a little pan in the water with one of their other boats a mile away, and he alerted to it. And now he leads them to these animals. And that's it seems to me that feels so incredible to us, but that is within the capacity of dogs all the time. So, I mean, it really makes me reimagine my dog's experience. We blunt that. In other words, we're not reinforcing and encouraging that all the time. So our dogs aren't always telling us about the whale poop, but the fact that it is part of what they notice changes my way of looking at them.
Interesting. You're giving me nothing but great segues here. I would love to talk about one of your, let's say, research assistants, your dog, Finn. And I found the book to be really wonderfully bookended by this sort of discussion, how we sort of forget our sense of smell in certain ways. And when we have companion animals, pets, they do too in a sense. Can you tell us about getting him to engage and taking him to, quote, this is all in capitals, his new favorite place on earth?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, once you start thinking about dogs as smelling creatures, you look at your own dog, which is what I did with my dogs, and think, oh man, I'm not creating a space for this to happen. So I started out doing just smell walks with my dogs where I would just let them smell as long as they wanted. They could lead the walk. And then I realized I had to do more. And I took one of my dogs, Finn, who was sort of the sniffy one, and sort of a professional dog will, go and he's just a professional dog. That's what he is. And so we went to this thing called nose work classes, which many of you perhaps know. And these are classes run often by training centers where there's obedience classes or there are agility classes or things to engage the dog, but also the owner-dog dyad. And nose work classes basically use the fundamental premise of detection dog training, but it's just a game. And all they're doing is coming to this center, and there are little bits of initially just a treat hidden in a room, in a training room. Maybe they're hidden under boxes. And what the dog is supposed to do is find them. And initially they start out, and it's amazing to see, because the dogs all start out, and some of them are really well-behaved dogs, which is really not that great for nose work, because you just wait to see what your person tells you to do. So they would just sit there, and you're not supposed to follow the person. You're supposed to follow your dog. They would just wait until the person did something, and the person was waiting until the dog did something. Nothing happens. That's what we've sort of done to our dogs. Other dogs have been trained not to jump on the table, which is nice, but that might be where the hide is. So in this context, they learn, I can pursue that. And after a few rounds of this, they eventually find the treat. They get extra rewards for finding it. They do a few of these rounds. You up the ante a little bit. Maybe the hides are on the wall or on a windowsill, or they're way up high. And then it's not even treats at all. They use neutral smells that dogs don't want to eat. So that's things like anise, the smell of anise. Or birch smell, and they learn to associate. When I find that new smell, then I get a reward for that. So same type of principles. Then you bring it outside, then it's with wind. Some people do this to competition, but just to see what happens to Finn when he started doing this, just this opening up of the possibility that he could use his nose to explore the world and that I would value that was amazing. I mean, he's always now looking at me with this look. Like, are we going there? Are we going there now? But you don't have to go there because you can do it at home. You can hide things in your house and create a time when you say, oh, go find it. And now both my dogs do this. One learned from the other. They have really different methods. Finn kind of surveys the whole scene, back and forth, scours every location. And Upton just smells in the air and just, oh, there it is. Just bumps into it. But they both love that game, and I'm so thankful that type of thing exists. It's just the beginning of the way that we can open up the noses of our dogs and allow them to see what they can see.
I have a couple more questions. You write towards the end, I will never smell as a dog does. I accept it. It is dogs' difference that I celebrate, and their ways of smelling. Their very noses are different. And I was thinking, after all this study, ultimately, not that anything can be summed up in a soundbite or one takeaway, but what would you have us take away about a dog's sense of smell, how we should approach them, more time on their walks, more
Right.
special tours, more things like this. Let them linger at their
Let them
friends'
sniff.
rear ends a little bit
I
longer.
feel like that's it. Let them sniff the thing. You know, to pull them away from a sniff is like, you know, yanking your kid away from the Grand Canyon as you drive by. They're like, oh, what's that? And then boom, you get pulled away. You know, let them sniff each other. This is how they get information about each other. We create a problem when we don't let them get that information about each other. The things that we think are impolite are not on a gauge of polite or impolite to dogs, you know? If you don't like a dog going at your guest's crotch, then give them something else to go for. Let them smell their hand, or I like to let dogs smell my ear. You know, like there's a lot of, we smell to dogs, so great, give them the opportunity to do that. I feel like that's the thing that I sort of hope for dogs. I mean, I do look at dogs when we're being yanked away from something, and I think like, oh, you know, but that's their thing. That if we want to indulge our dogs, that's kind of the direction to indulge them.
Well, the book worked on me then, because.
Excellent.
And as I say, I thought the book, you know, it was these two overlapping books, and so that leads to my last question. There's so much here that's personal, exploratory, you know, funny, inquisitive, intimate, and, you know, I mean, really when it comes down, philosophical in a sense. So you also say the great pleasure of, and having spent the last years thinking about smelling, is that my world has changed color. It smells. So how's it changed your outlook on the world, not even necessarily in regard to smell, but maybe about that in particular?
Well, it is a little bit like discovering that you had a superpower that you haven't been using. Because to realize that there's a lot of information to smell. And when I say information, I'm just saying it's like another aspect of everything, right? It's another aspect of my son that he has a smell. And that's something that maybe I've noticed, but now I kind of seek out and treasure. So that's changed me a lot. And it also makes me feel like, although, you know, I think you're right, I say I'm not going to ever be a dog, because we bring a language to smell. You know, we try to name smells, and that's actually the way I have learned to smell better, is by labeling things or drawing a picture in my mind of where I might discover that smell. And I don't think that's the way the dog is doing it. You know, their experience is different. But I do have much more of an empathetic understanding of my dog, realizing that they're existing in this world of smell where things aren't static. You know, everything is a cloud of smell. And maybe things aren't even as discrete, because the smell of this chair is intermingling with the smell of this table, and there's not really such a marker between them. And so I kind of understand that that's a way to see the world, and yeah, it's changed me.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm
Thanks.
wondering about, because the dog's smell is so critical to their lives, do dogs lose their sense of smell? And what happens to the dog that loses their sense of smell?
Right. Actually, it's not too common to lose their sense of smell entirely. I mean, with a trauma they could, but the natural degradation of vision and hearing that happens doesn't happen usually with age as much as with smell. Part of the reason for that is that the cells in the nose actually regenerate, in our noses too, regenerate every 30 days. So it's this unusual feature of the nose, probably because it has to filter out, I mean, it deals with the air, you know, which is full of potentially harmful substances as well as odorant molecules. So they're new ones every 30 days. And so in a way, the way, you know, what happens with the ears, our cells get mowed down over time. It doesn't happen with the nose. So dogs who lose their nose, you know, still have really good vision, really good hearing, still have other equipment, but it is really quite rare. So there's not a big enough subject group to know anything about their
I
experience.
read your book, Inside of a Dog, which I enjoyed very much.
Thank you.
And in fact, when I see dog owners take time with their dogs, I usually make a comment to them. And I mention your book.
Thanks. You'll be getting a little feedback, a little kickback for that. Thank you very much.
But I have a question about, you know, years ago I had an Afghan, My mother and I had an Afghan. And I enjoyed the smell of the dog. I don't know how much the dog enjoyed smells, but this is a more peculiar question, but I see very few Afghans nowadays, at
Yeah.
least in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And I don't know about New York, but what happened? Why is that? Or
Well, you know, breeds go through popularity surges with Americans, sometimes based on some cultural phenomenon. So, you know, there are surges of adoptions of dogs who are featured in movies, for instance. And I just think the Afghan hasn't gotten recently a lot of that kind of press. You know, it certainly could happen. People also have been moving towards smaller dogs in cities. That's a trend in a lot of urban areas, with the idea that a smaller dog is more suited to the smaller apartment than a house. Although, you know, there are lots of reasons why that's exactly the wrong idea. You know, the small dogs can be great, but they also are often higher energy dogs and higher stress dogs and higher fear dogs than big dogs. So, but that the notion, and it's been perpetuated by a lot of celebrities, that of having a dog you can pick up, put in your purse, that's handy, I think has sort of taken over just the recent cultural experience. It'll change. I think it'll change.
If I'm walking my dog's got padded feet, I'm not making a lot of noise, I'm approaching a house, there's a dog in there, suddenly bark, 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 bark. You
Yeah.
walk another 50 yards,
Yeah.
next dog. Now, we're not making any noise that I can really
Yeah.
hear. There's distance, there's a wall, there's all this other cushioning in between. So what's...
Is this a dog who?
Or
This
is
is a
this
dog who
just-
can't see you. This is not a dog in
Yeah.
the window. This is
Yeah.
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 Well, no, I mean their hearing is that's
And the
probably
other thing
hearing.
is, with dogs with pushed-in noses,
Yes,
is their sense of smell abbreviated or
right. Great question. So with the dogs who can detect you coming along, I think we're always surprised at their acuity. But two things: one, they do have quite good hearing, and a much higher frequency than we do, and so there are noises that we make that are distinctive for them. But two, this is an important one, and it's not about this, amazing ability of dog. It's that there's very little often going on for those dogs. And like the whole thing that's happening for that dog waiting at the house is that somebody is potentially coming by. And so they're really alert for it. They're really listening for it, right? So those two things together, I think actually can explain a lot of that behavior. And not to speak of the dog who hears the other dog barking 2 blocks away, and so knows to pay special attention. So like that's their world, right? And so your coming by is a great moment, even if you're not making a lot of noise. As to the short-nosed dogs, the brachycephalic dogs, like the pug and the boxer, yeah, they do have reduced ability to smell, and certainly their smell is much less good than the scent hounds, dogs who've been specifically bred for smelling, and long-nosed dogs. Part of that is they have just less of their genome. That's how we've bred them, to be committed to smell. Still way more than humans, but less. And also that they have a lot of trouble breathing. That's the sort of very sad thing that we've done with the short-nosed dogs. Since they can't breathe well, they're not sniffing as well, and so just less air is getting through the canals. So unfortunately, and this is why you don't see a lot of pug airport detection like dogs out there, right? They're always long-nosed dogs.
Is there a certain scent that would be a reward to your dog that you could use as training, like orange blossom or something?
Great question. It's a great question, right? And you pick one that we love too, right? I'm not sure that would be their favorite. It's a great question, and I'm not sure that there has been an evaluation of dogs' preference for non-food-like scents. I mean, there are some which are considered to have a sort of therapeutic value, like the lavender studies have been done and things like that. Some contentious results there, but all you would have to do is pair it with something. Basically, what you would have to, you could create what the scent is, because you create a situation where the scent is followed by a treat, scent followed by a treat, and do that 100 times, and then the scent alone becomes a reward. And that's just classic, conditioning, classic learning theory. We learn that way, dogs learn that way. So you could create your dog's reward scent if you wanted to stick with it.
Thank you. While we're getting to this, one thing I didn't get to, there's a section about dogs hunting truffles, and it has another of my
Yeah.
favorite. It would be an expensive one, but you write that the perfect convergence of dogs' desires and our own are truffles. So there you
Right,
go.
that's right.
There's
If you have a
one.
little extra money,
Yeah.
just make it truffles.
So I don't want to ruin my dog's experience at the dog park. I just want to let them be and enjoy, but how do I act toward uneducated dog owners that mind when my dogs sniff their dog's butt? And,
Right,
you know.
right, right. I think all one can do is comment on it like that, right?
Okay.
Like this is our experience.
Right.
That I don't want to be sniffing your butt, but it's okay if my dog does, right? Like,
Sure,
and people will have. You can't change everybody's mind
Yeah.
about it. People have
Okay.
very definite opinions about their dog, but it's about just opening up the possibility to them that part of what we might be thinking about our dog's behavior is due to extrapolations from what we think about our own behavior. And also just introducing, in my mind, it's just introducing the fact of the matter of what types of information they can get through smell about each other, and that they kind of need to get about each other in order to socially interact successfully. Just exposing people to that, people will do with it what they will, I don't try to badger people with it, but just giving them the information, they can make up their mind.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to thank you for your work. I think I first heard you on Fresh Air, and I went home and I just felt like I had a whole new perspective on my dog, and I think it helped me be much more compassionate towards my dog.
Cool.
And I hope that, and the broader perspective, maybe this type of work is helping, I don't know, public policy or trends that overall would help improve the existence and lives of these animals. But I have a question that's sort of, please help me with training my dog, but it relates to a broader dog cognition question. And the situation is, I live with my girlfriend, she has cats, and once in a while the dog will sort of go after the cat, and I catch the dog right away, and I say, don't do that. The dog listens, and I kind of yell at it, say, don't do that. And then I put the dog on the pillow, and pretty soon after that, almost right away, I start to praise the dog. The dog's calm, it's not doing anything. And my girlfriend says, why are you praising the dog when it just did something bad? And I say, well, from what I understand, dogs really live in the moment, and I scolded the dog in the exact moment when it was doing something bad, and it responded, and I'm happy about that. So,
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we also know dogs have some kind of emotional memory. Dogs can be traumatized by experiences. So, where do you strike the balance when you're working with your dog?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's tricky. One of the things that we almost all grew up with was scolding dogs as a thing that you could do. But the best learning theory is all about how reinforcement is the best way to teach dogs what you want them to do. And so that means doing something weird, which is not giving them something, including not punishing them when they've done something wrong. That actually turns out to work better, but just instead giving them the opportunity to do something right. So if you're redirecting your dog to that pillow, which is what it sounds like you're doing, and then praising them for going there, that's the right thing. I think the scolding is actually for us. That makes us feel like we've had a communication with the dog. But for the dog, the scolding, unless they are clear, it's clear to them what they're being scolded for, is just anger. And so certainly, while they're on the pillow, if you're scolding them, then you'd be scolding them for being on the pillow. With something like that, it's normal for dogs to, I would think, it's normal for dogs to chase a cat now and then. I have 2 dogs who live with a cat, and they sleep together, but then also every once in a while, at a certain time in the evening, they suddenly see the cat as prey. It just happens. And they're buddies, they eat and drink together, the cat can lie on them and knead them, and then suddenly the cat is prey, and they run after the cat. And I think, well, that's just part of having a dog and having a cat, is that one of them is a small prey animal to the other one's eye, and that will happen occasionally. it usually is not something where we have to be worried that they're going to catch the cat. If you were worried, then you have to know when the dog is going to chase. Maybe it happens at the same time every night, every day, or you can sort of see it coming, and you redirect the dog's attention to something else. That's what people with reactive dogs do. If you're walking down the street and you have a dog who seems to be reactive to other dogs, you notice when another dog is coming, and that's when you get the dog looking at you, and you praise them for that. And then the incident goes by without any emotion. But so that you sort of have to be on it, and then you redirect them. I think that's the best way. And then feel like, yeah, we live with animals. It's not always controlled. And feeling like that's okay is part, I think, of living with animals, which means that there are going to be moments where they're not doing what we want. Like, I think that has to be okay. I hope it's okay.
Thank you so much. It's just so fascinating, wonderful. I'm a dog lover. I used to be a dog walker. I've never had a dog myself, but I get the sense that whenever I see a dog, they're like, yeah. Like they're like,
you.
oh, I know you like me. And it's like we kind of have this connection. And then I think, oh my gosh, is it a smell thing?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, because I haven't read your book yet, is there some sort of sense of smell in relation to seeing a human being, and then they're like, oh, I'm really comfortable immediately with this person because I've not yet met a dog that I don't like, or that doesn't like me, actually. That's the more important thing.
I feel like I don't know if there's a good person smell, but there's definitely a scared person smell, like a person who is not ready to interact with you or is doing something erratic. There's something about that. I think probably more of what you're giving off is you're approaching the dog in the right way. And that's subtle, but that's something we all learn. Those of us who like to meet a lot of dogs and like to be encountering dogs, is you just have a way of not going head on toward the dog. You get down toward them, you start speaking in a voice which indicates that you're a person to be approached and not feared. And if the dog has any reaction, you don't badger them. Like, you're doing all these things in real time that the dog is sensitive to. So I think that's what you probably look like to those dogs, is that you sound and look like a person who's friendly. And I don't know if there's you smell good to me, but I'm not sure about for dogs.
Hi.
Hi.
So I saw something about dogs recognizing their owner wagging their tail a certain way.
Yes.
Seeing someone else wagging their tail a different way.
Right.
Have there been tests on long-term smell memory with someone a dog hasn't seen in a very, very long time, and how they recognize a person according to smell alone? Has anything like that been done?
A lot of the it's putting the tail stuff aside, which is this fabulous thing, which shows that they tail a little bit more, they wag a little more to one direction than the other if it's a familiar person or a stranger, which is kind of great. But the smell, do they recognize someone by smell after long? We have, video evidence on YouTube of that, basically. And one of my favorite bits of evidence is when you have somebody who's gone for a long time and comes back, which are usually soldiers who are dispatched somewhere or they're overseas, and then they come back, and there occasionally are these wonderful videos that indicate that it really is largely smell, where the person comes in and they're not recognized. It's the stranger coming in a uniform, and that's not the familiar sight at the door or coming out of the car, and the dog goes nuts and barks and they're showing all the signs of fear. And then there's something that happens. Either the person gives them their hand to be smelled, or the air just travels to the dog, and you see suddenly a change in that they've smelled the person. Certainly they have a scent memory. Probably most of their memory of us is of our smell, right? That you smell like you to your dog. You might look like you, but that's less important than what you smell like. So insofar as they have any memory, and they seem to for long periods for people they knew, it's probably through smell.
My dogs will always try to eat the lures. It doesn't matter.
They'll only try to
eat the lures.
The
anise, birch, or clove, they just try to eat
the lures, yeah.
So my question is, how do you feel about barn hunting?
Oh, like hunting for rats?
Yeah.
Right.
Is it cruel, or is it okay because it's so much fun for dogs?
Right. In fact, in New York, they do that too with rats in the alleys in downtown. Sometimes they have the ratters come out, and so she was asking, how do I feel about barn hunting? I don't love it because, I mean, I'm sure it is exciting for the dog. I don't love it because it's terrorizing another animal. But this is, I admit that this is an animal that people want to extinguish already. And so this is a way to kill two birds with one stone, as it were, two rats with one terrier. Give them a game. And it's also what they were bred to do most often. In many cases, these are small dogs who were bred to be rat hunters. So they're being given the thing to do, which is we actually bred them to do, so we should probably be giving them something to do. I mean, one could create something which was more humane, it seems to me. But I understand the appeal of that, absolutely.
So I was thinking about your saying that smells are information, and that in the way that when we raise children, we like to expose them to all kinds of stimulations, so to music and to art and to reading, and that reading, we assume, and all those exposures actually build brain connections and synapses and create intelligence. And so I'm wondering, do we foster the dog's intelligence in some ways by allowing that free experience of the world, and that maybe in mysterious ways that we don't quite fully appreciate?
Yeah, what a nice way to put it. I think that, I don't know if I would call it intelligence, but we kind of, yes, we're embracing allowing them to live out their dogness, as it were, by the potential of their genome, of their species, by allowing them to smell, by encouraging them to smell, and in creating an environment where smelling is, if not rewarded, at least allowed, where smells are, if not provided, available, right? I think that allows them to be the species that we have partially designed and we are partially responsible for.